I would like to just talk about a few different things in this period. For example, the coronavirus, that I wrote an article recently on this, and the title is called, "I Follow God, Not the Secular State." You think about it, what right does the state have in entering their church and telling the priest how he is to distribute the infinite God in the Eucharist? I mean, this is worse than Hitler. This is worse than Hitler. I wrote an article also before that, which was called the History of Communion in the Hand. And then the subtitle, "Communion in the Hand was not only started in disobedience, but was perpetuated by deception." How many priests are afraid? We must pray for the priests and bishops, because they're afraid to lose their title, their prestige, their money. There's no cowards in paradise. We have to be willing. If we're not willing to acknowledge Christ before men, the Father will not acknowledge us before the angels, as Jesus said. We're living in a period more deceptive in the history of the world. In fact, Jesus Christ even said in Matthew 24, he said that it says it'll be so deceptive that even the elect will be deceived if possible. That's Matthew 24:24. And as we know in the Bible, St. Paul, second letter of Thessalonians chapter 2, the great apostasy before the manifestation of the Antichrist, there will have to be taken away that which blocks the Antichrist, which is the Eucharist. Our Lady also explains, I'll get back to that later. Our Lady also explains that, talking about the great responsibility of priests and bishops, and she says that the main blame of this great apostasy today falls on the shoulders of the priests and bishops. On the other hand, the main solution that will come about soon will come about through the few priests and bishops who remain faithful to the truth that doesn't change, and most of them will be martyred. So the priests and bishops have a great responsibility, so don't judge them, but pray for them, pray for them, pray for them. Another interesting thing I might say here, that because I was in the priest movement for priests with Don Stefano Gobi, and I also knew his first successor, which is, his name was Padre Quartilio Gabrielli. And 2 weeks before Don Stefano died, Padre Quartilio Gabrielli was with Don Stefano, and after the Mass they were together also with another priest. And Don Stefano said, if you want, let's take a look at this message, because I think this message summarizes what's happening in the church today. Here's the message. It was the message of Our Lady, October 18th, 1975. Hear the message. Our Lady says, "My adversary will one day think that he is celebrating a complete victory over the world, over the church, over souls. It will be only then that I will intervene, terrible and victorious, that his defeat may be all the greater when he is certain in his conviction that he has conquered once and for all. What is in preparation is so extraordinary that its like has never happened since the creation of the world. That is why everything has already been predicted in the Bible. The terrible struggle between me, the woman clothed with the sun, and the red dragon, Satan, who has now succeeded in seducing many souls." And another message that you might find interesting to read yourself, because I'll only give you a little bit right now, and that is the message of June 13th, 1989. Our Lady says, "If the task of Masonry is to lead souls to perdition, bringing them to the worship of divine divinities, the task of ecclesiastical Masonry, on the other hand, is that of destroying the church, destroying Christ and his church, building a new idol, namely a false Christ and a false church." You might, if you want to know more of that, go to the messages in the book of with Gobi, June 1989, and you'll find a lot more. I tell people in the parishes here in Perugia, I say if at a certain point, Father Joe says something in his homilies that you say this is not right according to the teaching of the Church or whatever, and you find out that it's in contrast with the Catechism of the Catholic Church of John Paul II, I say to him straight out, follow the Catechism because it's the truth from God that doesn't change. Don't follow Father Joe to hell. And I think we can apply that rather well today. I'd like to, a little note here also. One of the strong things that's rather hidden and very politically incorrect to talk about, even in the Catholic Church today, and that is that it's rather present in the Catholic Church, secular feminism. Christian feminism is great. Secular feminism does great damage. If you want to know much more about this, you remember that holy priest, Father John Hardin, Jesuit. You might put in Google the title Feminism and the Language Wars of Religion. But this will be audio because he gave a lot of talks that were recorded and you can download the audio regarding this. But I'd like just to say a few words about this. All of this, one of the very strong uses of Satan in this battle right now is secular feminism, which is rather strong even in church, which does not respect the vocation of husband and wife according to God. And it looks at the married, in other words, we should look at the married saints such as Saint Monica, Saint Rita, and so many other saints, Saint Blessed Francesca of Roma. They look at these saints as old-fashioned. Oh, that was 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago, but we're modern now, because these holy women patiently persevered in inspiring their husband to fulfill our God-given vocations instead of continually criticizing one's husband and then reversing the roles of husband and wife. On the other, one of the main goals of secular feminism is to put aside the man and husband because it is to the man that God gave the vocation to protect the family and the society, which is gravely lacking today. This is also why Stalin promoted secular feminism to weaken the fundamental cell of society, the family, so there would be much less resistance to his dictatorship. According to divine revelation, the husband is the head of the family and the wife is the heart of the family. There is a great silence in the church today about this, as the highly controlled mass media forms the minds of people. To say this today, even in the Catholic Church, is very politically incorrect. Even though it was generally politically correct for almost 2,000 years by Christians and non-Christians to recognize the obvious about the perception of man and woman. One finds promoted in the church today the empowerment of women, which is good. But what is promoted is very often not the empowerment of the fundamental virtues of women as seen in the women saints, married and unmarried, such as patiently inspiring a priest or her husband as the head of the family, as did the saints for 2,000 years. Today, there is rather promoted empowerment according to the world today, to do as men have been called to do by God. This is a fundamental goal of secular feminism. A fundamental tactic of Satan to destroy the fundamental cell of society and the family is to confuse and reverse the vocations according to God. Today we have even arrived to approving same-sex marriage, transgender, and what's next. This is why there are very few male voices today to protect us, to protect the family and society, and to alert us to the very grave hidden dangers today. In the mass media today, the woman is presented as the one to look to for leadership rather than the man as God intended. The few men who do speak to protect the sheep and to alert us to the sly hidden tactics of the wolf are rather easily silenced in many ways, since the world elite have great control of the mass media of most governments and are well infiltrated into the religions in the world today. I'd like to just now say a few words about some of my experiences here in Perugia, just a little bit. There was in September 2014, there was a priest in our diocese and in my area who committed suicide. And Cardinal Bassetti, who's also the president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, he decided to put aside what he had programmed to talk about, to talk about the suicide. And some of the younger priests, they complained saying that they thought that the cardinal was not close enough to the priests and so on. At a certain point, I grabbed the microphone and I said before almost 200 priests and 2 bishops and so on, I says, "Dear brothers, priests," I said to them, I says, 14 years ago, I listened to the words of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and I began to spend at least 1 hour every day before Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament in church. And I said to them, when I started that 14 years ago, I never ever again felt any loneliness. And I said to them, I had encouraged at least 20 priests in the diocese to do the same, and all of them said, "I don't have time." And I said to them, each one, I says, if I don't spend that hour with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament each day, I end up offering to people a poor priest called Father Joe rather than Jesus Christ. They were in agreement, but they don't do it. They don't do it. We're sucked into activism. Do you realize that in the seminary, for example, in our area, Umbria, for Perugia and around, there's the seminary. Do you realize that there was a good holy nun that I know, and I was her confessor. You can find this on my article. And she cultivated a good group and everything else. And she was even in working catechism in the diocese. She remained faithful to the catechism of the Catholic Church. And there were several pastors who sent her away when they discovered that she remained faithful to the catechism instead of the modern church. And she had also cultivated a little group, a good group around her. And one of these people in the group decided to become a priest. So he entered the seminary, and he learned from this good holy nun, and so he's passing time before the tabernacle. And so the rector and the spiritual director, they went to him and said, "Well, what are you doing? You're not here. You're not called to be a monk, but a diocesan priest. You shouldn't waste your time here. You have other more important things to do than to spend time here in church." To give you an idea, that's what I'm saying. Pray for the priest. Pray for the priests. And I even said to him, he says, do we believe that we are the savior of the parish? I says, in Ash Wednesday, we receive the words, "Remember your dust, it's to dust you return." We believe that we're the saviors instead of Jesus is the savior. In our meeting in February 2019, from the mouth of the Cardinal Bassetti, he was talking about a conversation between himself and another priest friend 50 years ago. And he said, he quoted this old priest, and the old priest 50 years ago, he says, "But you and I, we are the same age." He says, "Do you remember 68? He said that in 68 there was a slogan, "Continual struggle." Do you remember that the Christian life is a continual struggle? Do you understand what's going on here? Cardinal Bassetti is encouraging all of us priests here at Perugia to continue the struggle of the revolution of 1968, to rebel against all authority and all the rules, and finally we're free of all rules. And they end up being free, of course, also of God. And think about this, how different this is of this struggle that you read in the Catechism number 409, that life is a dour combat against the forces of evil. Instead, they're promoting the dour combat against these hypocrites that have been in the Vatican all these centuries. And the the people of the generation of 68, they were in power, and they thought they would find happiness and freedom by throwing out all rules and regulation, reject all authority in God, but they unwillingly fell under the domination of the prince of the world, Satan, who they believe does not exist. Another time in December 2018, Cardinal Bassetti asked a Monsignor Fausto Sciaruppa, and for a half hour he praised as a persecuted hero a modernist priest sent away from Rome. His name was Monsignor Luigi Piastrelli, during the time of St. Pope Pius X. Then he was welcomed in Perugia in order to continue to promote modernism against St. Pope Pius X, against the Vatican. Just to give you a little idea of pray for the priest, pray for the priest. There was another, in November last year, in 2019 November, at a monthly meeting, again, Cardinal Bassetti invited a priest from the Diocese of Bergamo to talk to us, the priest in Perugia. And with persuasive words, he told us that everyone today is having sex outside of marriage, and we priests must go along the flow and bless all this. And if you want the details, go to my website and read the article, Priests Systematically Brainwashed. I gave details about this. And at a certain point, I was the only priest at that meeting that raised my hand and says, "What's going on?" I said it gently. I asked myself, did God give us the 10 Commandments for our good or for our evil? And I says, do we trust God or do we trust ourselves? I also says that in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, you find the words that I forgot the words in English. The apostles were they couldn't believe the words of Jesus. They were so strong. This is incredible. How is this possible? Read it, chapter 10, Mark. And so I said to them, I says, what did Jesus respond in that situation when the apostles were amazed at the strong words of Jesus? I says, did Jesus respond like we heard today? To have compromises, to go with the world's already like that and so on? No, Jesus says that for God everything is possible, for man nothing is possible. And I even indicated, that according to this modern church today, we've got to take out that phrase in the act of contrition to be with the modern church. That phrase, I firmly resolve with the help of thy grace to sin no more and to avoid the near occasion of sin. And Cardinal Bassetti, when the priest came to respond to our interventions, and when he came to me, Cardinal Bassetti says, we don't have time. He didn't want him to respond to what I said. He wasn't too happy, Cardinal Bassetti wasn't too happy with what I had said. And I might also even add even stronger here that Cardinal Bassetti, in my last parish about 5 years ago, I simply explained the gospel according to the catechism. And slowly but surely the people began to realize they'd never heard this before, and many of them were angry to discover that they're not living the gospel, and some of them called the bishop. Because I was saying we got to live the 10 Commandments according to what's in the catechism, not according to the television, And so some of them called the bishop, and the auxiliary bishop called me in about 5 years ago, and they took away my parish. And I might even add, you can read it all. Go to my article with the title, A Letter to My Bishop, and I explain in detail what happened. So again, I say pray for the priest, because as Our Lady always says everywhere, Fatima, Lourdes, pray for the priest. They have a great responsibility. A priest does not go to heaven alone, and a priest does not go to hell alone. Our Lady asks us continually for our sacrifices. She said in one of her messages, 1st of April 74, she said, "Let these children of mine offer me all their sufferings, all their misunderstandings, all their difficulties. This is the greatest gift that they can make to me, because thus they allow me to carry out in time, in this your time, my task as mother and co-redemptrix. I will save many souls redeemed by Jesus, but at present so far away from him, because my sons, together with me, will pay for them by your sacrifices." This, dear friends, this is the hour. She said also in another message, 10th February 78, "This will be the hour of the martyrs, who in great numbers will shed their blood, and of the remnant who will envy those they see persecuted and slain." At a certain point also, she even said a couple times in the message, this period of 3.5 years, which I believe will begin next year, will be so strong that Our Lady said several times, we cannot even imagine those 3.5 years when we get to that point. But I want to say courage, friends. Have courage, because Jesus and Mary are closest to us when we are in suffering. And in fact, she even said in the blue book he called that just as Mary was close to Jesus on the foot of the cross, so too she will be near us if we are called to the gift of martyrdom. And I'd also like to encourage you to make spiritual communions. Even if you can't get to the church, there's a great saint, Pascal Bailon, who often did, you might say, a spiritual communion, looking at the nearest church from afar and saying, "Jesus, I adore you in that church a mile away, and I ask you to come to me spiritually." I think this is a very, very good practice to do. I think another apparition that I think is valid is that in Our Lady of Queen of Peace in Anguera, Brazil. And she said in the message of 4442, she said, "Dear sons and daughters, your life here on earth is in truth a continuous succession of encounters with my son Jesus. But the encounter most important with Jesus you have in the Eucharist. Value the presence of my Jesus. There will come the day in which the precious food in many places will be taken away. Times will come when your encounter with my Jesus will be given in secret, thanks to the faithful ministers who will remain firm in the truth. The time announced by God through Daniel will come. Be attentive." I want to also add a little thing here that John Paul II, in his encyclical Ecclesiae de Eucharistia, he said, "There can be no danger of excess in your care for this mystery, for in this sacrament is recapitulated the whole mystery of salvation." Look at what's promoted in the church today, and also with coronavirus. You know, I remember even when I went to the spiritual exercises of the diocese 4 years ago, and they in the afternoon with the modern liturgists, you know, they put a cross in front of the steps, in front of the altar, with a light on the cross, with no body, no corpse, and then behind, it was totally in the dark, the tabernacle. This is the new liturgy. This is the new liturgy. The devil has to get rid of the Eucharist, because it's the most powerful thing we have on the face of the earth to help us in this period. And that's why it's very interesting that these 3.5 years, I'll get into this even more in a few minutes, these 3.5 years will be when there will be no Eucharist in all public churches in the world. And that's when the devil will have power incredible, and you can't even imagine it. I'd like to just say a few words now about this period of great tribulation. That this is, I'm often like my opinion, but I'll give you my reasons why I believe this. I believe that the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I think there's a good possibility, I think maybe, that the Immaculate Heart of Mary will her heart will triumph before the end of 2024. And the reason, let me explain why I believe that. And the reason why I believe that is this, that first of all I want to say that, I don't know if all of you know that with a computer, with a program, we can see exactly what the three kings saw 2,000 years ago with the combination of the stars and the planets that motivated them to go to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Because God created the entire universe. Yes, there was a big bang and everything else, but the stars rotate precisely like a big clock, and the planets and so on. And God left in His creation, who's infinite, He can do what He wants. He left in that creation certain signs, in particular, that indicate the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. Of course, we must distinguish here between astrology and signs of God that He left in His creation. And this is what the three kings were looking for. They knew, they studied, they were intelligent men. They knew about the prophecy of the Jews of the Messiah that was to be born, and they knew it was pretty close and all these things. They began to look for signs. And just very briefly, I'll just tell you, what they saw is about 15 months before the birth of Christ. They were looking at the stars, studying, and they were used to it. They saw that Jupiter, which is called the king of the planets, began to go around the king of the stars, which is called Ranus, like a coronation of that star. A coronation. And they said, we never see anything like this. And this continued for about 9 months, to June. And then in June arrived, what do you call that planet? Venere, in Italian, Venus. Venus arrived near Jupiter, right next to each other. And so it seemed like the most strongest star they've ever seen with the naked eye. Two are the closest planets, one next to another. When they saw that, they said, this is a sign from God, let's follow that. Anyway, what I want to talk about here, though, is the recent sign that is equally significant for those who believe. September 23rd, 2017. And what you have here is that on that morning before the sun arose, looking at the constellation Virgo, at the head of that constellation, normally there is 9 stars, which is the constellation Leone. And that day, only that day, look, I'm always talking from the point of view of the earth, not from outside, but from the point of view of the earth, with all the combinations. 3 planets arrived to make it 12 stars at the head of the constellation Virgin. And also on that day, at the foot of that constellation, was the moon. And then also on that day, from the point of view of the earth, the sun rose exactly behind this constellation to be the woman clothed with the sun. Also, 10 months before, entered into the womb of this constellation the planet Jupiter, called the king of the planets also, and remained in the womb of that constellation for 9 months, like in pregnant. And then at the beginning of September it went out, and then we saw the woman clothed with the sun, the 23rd of September. Then, this is another interesting thing here, in December 31st, 1983, NASA published a little article, and you can find it in my article, I even have an image of that publication, that they discovered a new planet. And they said it was about the size of Jupiter, and it goes around our sun every 3,600 years. That's why they didn't discover it before. And many scientists believe that it was probably this planet that passed too close to the Earth 65 million years ago, which caused the disappearance of the dinosaurs. Because it just how do you say it in English? It passed near the Earth and it changed North Pole, South Pole, and everything else. And so what I'm saying here is that I think what happened after that publication of NASA, there was silence. No more information. Silence, 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 silence. And after reading on the internet Italian, English, and everything else, because they don't want us to know this information, almost immediately after that publication, NASA discovered with their computer to discover exactly where does that planet go. And basically what I've discovered is that about the beginning of October 2017, this planet entered into the zone where the Earth orbits. And it goes to the other side of the Sun in an elliptical orbit, known round, but elliptical. And then it comes back, and then it goes out of where the Earth orbits 7 years later. And I think what NASA discovered with their computer, that when it comes out, it again will pass too close to the Earth, and it will cause great havoc. And so they didn't want anybody to know this, and I found articles too that they've, with all the money they've stolen from us, they've prepared their bunkers with lots of money, and their plan is that the elite of the world will survive this, and we peasants will die. That's their plan, but they don't believe in God. And so if it passes, that means if it passes too close to the Earth in October 2024, I believe that because the devil can't create a planet, God can. I believe that will be the great finale of this period of tribulation. And so then if you count backwards 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, when there will be no Eucharist in all the public churches, you arrive to 2021 in the springtime sometime. Another thing I want to add to this is that you probably know that Lucy of Fatima said that in the future there would be a pope that would be killed. And also Pope Pius X talked about this twice, that a pope in the future would be killed. But he also gave a little bit more information, because he said the name of this pope will have my same name, not as pope but as baptism. His name was Giuseppe Sarto, Joseph Sarto. So he's saying that in the future the pope that will be killed will be a Pope Joseph Ratzinger. And then another thing that I think what will happen here also is that before they offer this invalid Mass, the Mason, ecclesial Masonry, has to get rid of Pope Benedict. And that, so that would be killed there. And then after they, and you got to understand that the Freemasons are the ones who pay for terrorist groups. They can get rid of people in any way they want, because they're the ones that control the terrorist groups. And I think then what will happen will be that they'll get rid of Benedict, and then Cardinal Bergoglio will give his resignation, and then they'll elect another one that Padre Pio indicated will be much worse. And then he will require all the priests and the bishops to make an oath of blind obedience to him, and then they'll change the Mass, and then all of the priests and bishops who don't go along with this, the ones who remain faithful to the truth, will be greatly persecuted. You must remember that when there's no more Eucharist in the public churches, the devil, Satan, will have much more power. And so many martyrs will be. And Padre Pio, I found a thing from Padre Pio that he said that he talked about a month of May that will be very strong and that will not be forgotten. So perhaps that will be next year in May, perhaps. This is just my opinion. You might also read the second letter of Thessalonians, chapter 2, that St. Paul says very clearly that before the manifestation of the Antichrist, there must be taken away that which blocks him. You can read it better in the Bible. And that's the Eucharist. The Eucharist has to be taken away before the Antichrist can manifest himself. And so I think we must pray very hard and keep our eyes open, because I repeat, I hope all of you know the 4 conditions to have a valid Mass. And the last one in particular I want to talk about that is just simply, in the consecration, the priest must say, "This is my body, this is my blood," otherwise there's no Eucharist. It's interesting also in the Summa Theologica that San Tommaso d'Aquino, he spent more pages than normal to explain that you must have those words, otherwise there is no Eucharist. He explained it very carefully. I would like to just end here with just a few words on some of the dangers in particular on the right side of special groups that think they're better than others and all these things. As I said before, I think a very good model for us is Mary at the foot of the cross. When Jesus is covered with blood and everything else, you know. Today, you might say the body of Christ, the church, is covered with blood, with scandals, infiltrated totally into the church and everything else. We have to have balance. We have to have balance. That's why I repeat, the book, The Messages to Don Stefano Gobi, is a great gift for our times to give us this balance. I want to encourage you to read that and to get a lot of help, One of the groups I'd like to, at least in particular, talk about is, you might have heard this particular priest in Italy. His name is Don Alessandro Minutella. And he was saying the truth, and at a certain point his bishop threw him out, and then he continued to talk, and so finally he was excommunicated. And but what happened, the problem is it made worse about a year or less than 2 years after that. He began realizing that Cardinal Bergoglio was not canonically elected, as even indicated by the prophecies of St. Francis of Assisi. He began to say that if a priest during Mass says the words in the Mass, Pope Francis, the Mass is not valid. Because underneath this is a certain pride. He wants to say that only our group has valid sacraments, everybody that's gone with that is out. But this is not what the church is taught. You know, St. Ambrose, which is picked up by St. Thomas Aquinas and then the Council of Trent, said that the essential words of the Mass to have validity are the words of the consecration. This is my body, this is my blood. The other words are secondary. It's true that if a priest doesn't obey the liturgical books regarding the secondary words, it could very easily for that priest be a mortal sin, very easily. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that he's saying it's not valid, but it is valid. The Council of Trent even said that. The Council of Trent even said, you know, remember this says if the priest is against Martin Luther, it says if the priest is a mortal sin, the Mass is valid. It even said that if the priest in Sunday morning is in mortal sin and there's no other way of getting confession or anything else, and there's no other place or whatever, he's got to celebrate that Mass for the people because the people need the Eucharist. And another thing, like Don Minutella, he said those 1,290 days prophesied by the book of Daniel, there would be no daily sacrifice for that length of time. He says it's just metaphorical, so as to say that it has already begun to lose the Eucharist in the whole world, and only his group has the valid sacraments. So I just want to caution you about this, because the sacraments are valid, even though many priests have lost their faith. Many priests treat the Blessed Sacrament in a very sacrilegious way. We have to, I want to encourage you to be like Mary at the foot of the cross when there's many scandals and the church is covered with blood of scandals and everything else. And many people also, I want to just say a little word about this, that there's many of these right-wing groups that want to say that the Second Vatican Council is not valid. And you probably heard some on the news recently with Archbishop Vigano, Bishop Schneider, and so on. But then I found the articles that Archbishop Vigano said that the problem was not the documents of the Council, but the well-organized misinterpretation of the Second Vatican Council. Because there's always a human tendency to want to blame somebody instead of blaming ourselves for the situation in the church today. And so it's always a very human tendency to want to blame the guy on top. But yeah, I'm saying, what can a good pope do if the majority, if not the great majority of bishops do not obey him? Look at the crisis of Humanae Vitae in 1968. Paul VI, read some of the things on Paul VI in some of the articles, that he realized that the great majority of priests and bishops don't obey the church anymore. And he was really out for, and I wanted to also add this too, that as Archbishop Gagnon indicated, there was a well organized from the ecclesial masonry to interpret the council in the way they wanted. And I'd like to just read this of a good holy priest that was a good friend of Don Stefano Gobi, who gave a talk at one of our spiritual exercises, annual spiritual exercises, in 2008. His name was Father Michael Garan, and there's over 200 priests present, more than 10 bishops. And he said in his meditation, he said that, talking about the attack on the truth of God, he said in his meditation, he says it grew gradually, this attack on the truth of God. It is enough to think of a subtle change that happened around the time of the Second Vatican Council. With the arrival of the experts, there developed the fashion of theologians, regardless of whether or not they deserved the name. The fact that they had published a book in general, that was enough. This continues, and with this, he said, with this, the center that guides the church in the minds of many had shifted from where God had placed it in the true magisterium, authentic magisterium, the Pope and the bishops in union with him, and became the various opinions of all sorts of writers. He said that there were students that would collect these books written by these people. So this has had an impact not only on the priests, but also on seminaries, on many universities. This is the first part of the attack on the truth, the foundation of the church. So I just wanted to say that to say, what the Second Vatican Council was valid. But you go to my website to read other things about this. I'm trying to also, if I have time, to write another article on this. And in conclusion, I would just like to repeat the solution, the solution fundamental for each one of us. We can't do like you remember Baraba. He didn't like the Romans, so we're going to have a revolution to kill the Romans. And even the apostles were expecting the Messiah to do the same work. And now we see that in America, your Black Lives Matter. And you know, we have to stick with what God has done us, even if we have to suffer. You know, think about at the national level, it was much worse after the French Revolution. It was much worse after the revolution in Russia against the Tsars. And I can say this too: for a woman who leaves his husband, or vice versa, except for very particular instances, it's worse after. They think they're going to have a utopia by leaving that wife or that husband. It's worse after. And I remember I was watching that psychologist on EWTN, Ray Guarendi. He once said that before 1960 in America, he said that the divorce rate in America was less than 5%. Then when they opened a little crack in the door, everybody wanted to go through it. And he said that it's interesting that those who before that time stayed with that wife or husband that was very difficult, it's interesting that when that wife or husband died, the one that survived cried like a baby. If we follow God's laws, even if it's difficult, even if the cross is heavy, God will be with us. That's what the saints did. We have to follow the saints, because we're living certainly in the most difficult times in the history of the world. And Our Lady is, you might say, the five-star general in this great battle. It's Our Lady that God has chosen to crush the head of the serpent, Genesis 3:15. Not me or Minutella or some other one that thinks they're going to save the church. And so we have to be very docile in what Mary's leadings. And to get that docility, spend as much time as possible on your knees before the Blessed Sacrament with your rosary. Because as we have to become little children, totally extreme trust in Our Lady that you read so often in the Blue Book. And Our Lady also continually repeats to consecrate yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and live the consecration. She even said, this is interesting, listen to this. This is a message on March 15th, 1993. Our Lady said, "This is the moment for all to take refuge in me, because I am the ark of the new covenant. At the time of Noah, immediately before the flood, those whom the Lord had destined to survive this terrible chastisement entered into the ark. In these your times, I am inviting all my beloved children to enter into the ark of the new covenant, which I have built in my immaculate heart for you, that they may be assisted by me to carry the bloody burden of the great trial, which precedes the coming of the day of the Lord." That was March 15th, 1993. Also, if you'd like to have the formula of the consecration to the Immaculate Heart with the Marian movement of priests, go to my website and go to the last part of the book, and it will have the formula for consecration for priests or laymen and so on. So, I just want to say to you, to what I said to many parishes, we must do what we did, that we learned at our First Communion, to the confession regularly, at least once a month, at least once a week on Sunday, the Mass, and the Rosary. I can tell you sincerely, right in this room here, because the church has been repainted, so it's not habitable, I pray 4 rosaries every day, twice the Via Crucis, the Coroncina, the Chaplet of the Divine Mercy, and the Divine Office, and so on. And I just want to encourage you, because in the end we know that the Immaculate Heart of Mary will triumph. So dear brothers and sisters, let us help each other to become saints so that we can pass eternity all together with God after this great tribulation. As it's written in the book of the Apocalypse, their clothes were white as garments, and it was said those were the martyrs who passed through the great tribulation. So let us pray for each other, that we might all meet again and spend all eternity together with Jesus and Mary and all the saints. May God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.